Our next speaker is Steve Sweeney. Steve, I hope that's okay with you. Steve is the international editor of Britain's Morning Star newspaper. He visited Ukraine in April to report from the ground. However, he was forced to flee the country after being threatened and labeled a spy. Steve, I'm sure you will have many interesting things to tell us, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invite to be here. I should underline that whilst I am the international editor of the Morning Star newspaper, I'm speaking to you today in a personal capacity. So I should make that very clear. The newspaper has its line on the crisis in Ukraine, and I wouldn't, which is reflected in its international pages and on the home pages. So what I say is my personal view, and that's based from as the introduction said, my time on the ground in the country. I think we should start by acknowledging, of course, that this is a proxy war being waged by NATO and by the imperialist forces in defense of a unipolar world aimed at Russia, but also behind Russia, China, as Jenny and other speakers and John have already said. I think it's also important to acknowledge that this conflict didn't start in February, but it started in 2014 with the Western-backed Maidan coup and the mobilization of the far right, which it is used and is still using as a proxy force, the so-called, or the new moderate rebels, the same that we saw in Syria, but also armed to the teeth by the West, which of course creates problems of its own for the future. And once the conflict has been resolved and we have a peace settlement, it comes to, one of the big questions is what happens to those Javelin missiles and all the other arms, the billions of dollars and billions of pounds, millions of pounds in arms that have found their way into the hands of not just the fascist and neo-Nazi forces, but some of those which have also found their way onto the black market and are appearing in the hand of jihadists in Ukraine, in Syria, sorry. So as the chair said, I was in Western Ukraine earlier this year. In April, I crossed, like many others did, I crossed from Poland. I took a coach from Warsaw. The border crossings were open still at that time, and I made my way into Lviv. I was on a coach with many others, but unlike them, they entered the country, and there was many people like them in military fatigues, and they entered armed to the teeth with weapons. But I went armed with a pen and a camera. And it is very clear which of those Ukraine is more afraid of, because the men and they were men in military fatigues, the man sitting opposite me who had a tattoo of a gun on his face, really set the tone really for the people that were entering the country. And they were met with a red carpet rolled out for them, and they were met by Ukrainian officials, and of course they were eventually, some of those that were either posing as humanitarian aid workers or others, but many of them have made their way to the front line, heeding the call of Zelensky as part of this international force. But for me, it wasn't quite that. I didn't get quite that welcome. I was immediately accosted by Ukrainian forces. I was told that I was a communist, which I am. I wholeheartedly admit to being a communist, but also that I would be treated as a spy. And they said that I would be detained, I would be tortured, and one of the people that spoke to me implied that I would be executed. Now, of course, I managed to escape from the country. I managed to cross back into Poland with a group of refugees, and I was given a pack with water and food in, and I just kept quiet and got back across the border. But I think what it said very clearly was, that there was an attempt to control the media narrative, and I'll speak about that a little bit later. But I did speak to a large number of people in Lviv, and also I spoke to some in Warsaw, and all of them, I spoke to scores of people, and all of them, testimony after testimony, told me that the Ukrainian armed forces were storing military equipment They were having and soldiers that were being housed in schools, in hospitals and residential areas. One woman, and I'll talk about the Amnesty report in a little bit too, but one woman who told me, she pointed to a picture of her, a photograph of her flat in Mariupol, or just outside Mariupol, and it was destroyed, and she pointed at it and she said, Azov. Azov did this. And she and another friend of hers told me that for 8 years they have been terrorized by far-right forces, and they actually welcomed Russian troops into that area, into the Donbas region and to the east of Ukraine. They were welcomed because they were the ones that were bringing water, medical supplies, and helping them when Ukraine's armed forces were threatening to shoot them. And they tried many times to leave Mariupol, but they said they were held hostage, and they said it was Ukraine's armed forces that threatened to shoot them. So this is who they were afraid of. And there's been this tightness, this attempt to control the narrative. We've seen the BBC, CNN, ITV, Channel 4, The Times, The Telegraph, The Guardian producing identikit reports from, that they say are from the ground, but mainly they're from Lviv and Kiev. Whereas those who are close to reporting the truth, people like Eva Bartlett, who's doing some fantastic work in the Donbass at the moment, reporting on the war crimes that are being committed there, the use of these cluster munitions, banned cluster munitions, petrol bombs. And she's been placed on a kill list, the Peacemakers kill list, which I'm sure everybody will be aware of. But what they may not be aware of is that a story that I broke in the Morning Star just last week, that we uncovered a similar kill list that is operating from an office in London and close to Hyde Park. It's Molfar, its name is. It's linked to the Ukrainian government, their digital transformation ministry. The head of PR from Molfar was joined them from Ukraine's Foreign Affairs Ministry, and it's of course supported by USAID and Pinkerton. It lists as one of its clients the notorious US anti-working class, anti-trade union intelligence agency, and they've been publishing lists of undesirables, photographs, and the names and the addresses and the details of children, younger, as young as sort of, or certainly under the age of 18, some over the age of 18. So there's a real attempt to control the narrative and to frighten those into who are getting close to the truth on the ground. We saw just last week the release of the Amnesty International report, which said that confirmed actually what many of us have been saying on the ground. They confirmed that the Ukrainian armed forces have been placing military hardware in schools, hospitals and residential areas, placing them at risk. And of course they faced a backlash from the mainstream press. The Times accused them of being Putin apologists, shameful Putin apologists. In the Telegraph they said that they were they were part of the extreme left. They blocked them in with Stop the War, and they're a de facto wing of Stop the War, as though Stop the War is some kind of organization that should be opposed, because now all of us and all of the people that have been calling for peace are branded Putin apologists. And of course Amnesty, I think most of us here will probably know the history of Amnesty International. They're, in my view, one of the most craven bootlickers of US imperialism, along with the other human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch. So when they're speaking out about this thing, I think it gives it extra credence. But what we have heard is that the organization inside Ukraine, the Amnesty's Kiev based wing, spent months suppressing that report and trying to get it blocked because it's vindicated and it's told the truth about what's happening in there. Now I'm going to of course somebody's just mentioned in the chat quite rightly, and I've written about this, Alina Lipp, the German journalist who's again been based in the Donbass region, faces 3 years in prison in Germany for her reporting from the area. So what the left must do as well, of course, is support those of people on the ground that are supporting or reporting the truth. The people that I spoke to begged me. They know what's happening. They know the narrative that's being spun out, and they begged me and they begged other people to to tell their stories. And it's their voices that are missing from the narrative, and it's their story that simply isn't being told. Now, I've got 1 minute left, and I'll just address the issue of Russian troops out as a slogan that has been raised across the movement. Now, for me, this is a simplistic and, again, a problematic slogan. It's not too different from the line of the Western imperialist powers who also say this, but what does it mean? And we do have some idea of what it means from and what it would look like from the past 8 years in the Donbass region, which has seen more than 8,000 civilians being killed by far-right forces, which is right now being shelled with banned cluster munitions. And as John, I think, said, and other speakers will rightly say as well, is that a withdrawal of this kind would lead to a massacre of Russian speakers in those areas by a brutal far-right force, and we must oppose that, I think. As in any conflict, there's going to be a negotiated solution. The left, of course, must should stand for that, and it should stand for peace. But peace isn't abstract in this scenario. What does that peace look like? What does it mean? Jenny spoke about the new world order that emerges from this, which I think is really what's at stake. And I think on the left we should be absolutely clear that peace is impossible as long as NATO exists. Now, the former Bolivian leader Evo Morales, he's issued a call for an anti-NATO alliance, and I think that we should heed that call. And for progressive forces, the demands I think John listed for supporting the people in the Donbass region and their rights for autonomy, I think is something that, of course, we should support from the left. We should support for a peaceful solution. But just to close, I think that all progressive forces now must unite and agitate for the disbandment of NATO. Thank you very much.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.